downtrend. The GM. GM. Today is Wednesday, 17th of April. Daily levels. So, this is going to be day 2 or day 3 of a million days in a row where I'll probably tell you do nothing, just wait. Don't fall for the premature bottoms. Don't panic and sell into the lows. This kind of thing tends to go on for longer than you would expect. And to me, it's quite simple in terms of look at this 4-hour trend that we're in. 4-hour downtrend. The bands, the red bands, are still wide apart, which indicates we're still in a strong downtrend and that the retests of the bands are holding as resistance. So it's failing to break through them and hold. It's failing to break through them and hold. And that's going to keep leading people who've tried to catch bottoms along the way into being susceptible really to their bottom attempts, right? So let me show it here. Right, as price is moving along here, this looks like a bottom to a lot of people, right? So they get long and they put their stop loss here. But what confirmation of a bottom was there other than a short-term bounce? Not much. So when there's not much confirmation of a short-term bottom, where do you expect it to bounce to? It should bounce into resistance, and in a trend, one of the things that acts as resistance are the short-term moving averages, EMAs. So it bounces up into the bands, fails to get above them, breaks down, takes out those stops, right? Then we have the big collapse. Same thing starts to happen again. Okay, price starts to come up here. People think the bottom's in. So what do? They put their next trade on, bottom's in this time, but that's a very wide stop, right? If you're like FOMOing in long here at 64, 63, 65, 66, not many people, we're talking like low time frame leverage, people flip-flop on their bias back and forth. Not many people are going to be able to use such a wide stop, right? So they'll put their stops in these areas too. They'll put their stops below that impulse candle there, and they'll put their stops below this impulse candle here. I'll take this one off just so you can see it clearly. And so it moves into the bands. It looks good, right? So we're finally bottoming out. But the 4-hour trend, downtrend, still has wide, right? Before a trend can properly shift, the bands go from wide and then they start to compress and then they turn green. And when they're in that wide, they usually reject off the bands. And then when they start to compress, they'll pop above it, they'll come back below it, they'll chop, very, very choppy. And then when the volatility decreases, right, after you have this choppy phase, you're having a battle essentially between bulls and bears, right? Bulls FOMO at the top, bears panicking, and bulls FOMO at the top and they panic and sell at the bottom, and shorts piling at the bottom, and then it bounces back up. And then you have here, these are 4-hour candles, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In this little area here, you see the volatility compress. So the volatility drops off. Price is holding above the bands and they're green. So the bulls have won that battle. You've also flipped this lower time frame level here, right? Whereas this was resistance, couldn't get above it, couldn't get above it, got above it, retested it, held it, and that led then to a nice little move up to the liquidity above. Same happens even over here. You have this 4-hour downtrend. How many times do we reject the red bands? Once, twice. I'm going to consider these two wicks as the same thing, as you can see, right? 1 bounce, 2, 3, 4 touches the lower band here. Then it breaks all the way through it, but the bands are still quite wide, so price isn't able to sustain that. That's an inefficient move. That's a good place for lower time frame traders to trade back down into the gap. It holds, it chops, it gets across it, back below it, back above it, and then starts to hold, right? And starts to hold above the bands. Bands go green. You get 1, 2, 3, 3 lower volatility, compressive candles here, and then we get a move up. Same happens on all, any trend that you see. It will go from, well, not every, obviously this doesn't happen every single time, but it's quite consistent, right? Reject the bands, reject the bands, reject the bands, all the way down, It's not rejecting the bands anymore, right? Each time it drops off, it's finding support, find support, find support. The bands are compressing. Then we get the impulse candle higher. That was the time, if you remember, took a long trade on BTC after the ETF launch. So right now, or in here, sorry. So people start to FOMO and get long again. We reject the bands once more, right? Push up into them. Looks like it's going to get above. It doesn't. It goes back down. It clears out some stops. And then holds. And now we're back up into the bands yet again. So is this the time where the bands are going to finally flip green? Well, they're not even that close to flipping green. So you couldn't say that. And by the way, when they flip green, I'd expect probably a move up to the origin of this initial breakdown. You'd be looking at a level like that, and possibly even the liquidity above, just from a mean reversion perspective, if we're going to play this as sort of a range. It will flip above the bands or compress below them. So two paths you could see would be, if it compresses here and the bands squeeze together, then you'll probably see a nice move up towards the highs. Certainly up to take that's those stops up there for anyone who's still short. Or we blast above it, drop back below it, same thing. And then once they compress and the bands start to turn green, that's when you can look at that move higher. Currently though, it's still following this 4-hour trend and rejecting each time. It's taken out those stops below. So what's happening now is we're bouncing off the lows once again. And where are people's stops going to be? They're going to be at the most recent lows. And of course, still some stops down below us here at the lows from the nuke on Saturday. Those lows may well hold, because that was like a deep fear-driven sell-off. It dipped below 60k on perps. It took out this liquidity from way back in March. But these lows here would currently be vulnerable to a sell-off if the bands reject at this level and they're not able to flip. And it's just simple logic behind the chop, because people will just keep trying to catch the bottom, right? People will keep trying to catch the bottom. But the problem is people tend to do this before there's any real confirmation of a bottom. Now this could be a slowing down trend, and it seems promising for BTC right now that we're down into this absolutely definitely strong support, and has been all the way since the first all-time high sell-off. 60k has been rock solid. We touched below it once. We front ran it here, 60.8, and we touched below it again on perps, not on spot, but spot went down to about 61, just under 61. Perps went below 60. So that's rock solid level for now. However, people on the lower time frames, right, this level can be rock solid, but is this one? That's still prone to a wick, in my opinion, for a sweep lower or another push down. And of course, we could also take out those lows. The main thing is, if you're trading in these areas, you want to be trading with a low time frame, a short-term mindset, right? Where you're playing bounces, you're getting out. If you're taking shorts, you're defining your risk and you're targeting the liquidity below. And just allow price to chop everyone else up. Just don't get yourself chopped up. Before there'll be any actual sustained uptrend again, you're probably going to see the bands go green at some point. Let's say it pops up here, right? We take out some of this areas up above and the bands turn green, which they would if we pushed up like that. People will start to pile back in. We'll probably drop back down at that point into support. Once more the bands will go red, then they'll come up, they'll go green, and we might see some lowering volatility at that point. And that's when you could actually see a sustained new trend. Most likely, right? Nothing's guaranteed, but you'd expect the bands to cross here and actually turn green. That's what I'm saying first. You'd expect them to first turn green, but usually when they first turn green, and I'll just draw these here to show you, they'd first turn green, right? Then we drop back down. The bands would then go red again as the 12 and 21 cross, and then they would go back to green. So you'd see them go red first and then back to green. This is going to be messy. It's hard to fucking draw the bands, but you know what I'm saying. You get the idea. They go from red to green. People think that's the bottom. Fakes out back below. They go red. Comes back up again. They go green again. That's when it's really all systems go for a long. Because Bitcoin is so big, it's a big asset. right? It takes a lot of time for it to reaccumulate. It doesn't just V reverse continuously, because that would leave a lot of inefficiency, and it's not impossible, but it tends to take its time in these reaccumulation phases. And on trade of the day, I'll show some lower time frame. I'll look at the data on lower time frames, and I'll also look at the price paths that you can see during the day today. But that's BTC. I'll just zoom back out to the daily and we'll look at here. It's currently just going nowhere, right? We had our strong sell-off on Saturday. We've had 1, 2, 3 full days of consolidation. We're now on to our fourth, just chopping around inside that. There's no clear direction here. Obviously, the daily bands themselves have flipped red, which is the first time since the ETF, post-ETF launch sell-off, that we've seen red daily bands. After Bitcoin had been holding, and if you remember, I talked about this, we talked about the meme pennant that I was seeing shared all over Twitter. And the meme pennant did pretty much exactly what you'd expect a meme pennant to do as a price action trader, which is not play out perfectly and actually play out with a fake out both sides. So we had a false breakout to the upside, and then we reversed all the way back down to the downside. So anyone who bet on bullish meme pennant, anyone who bet on the bearish meme pennant breakdown, both sides have had really a bit of pain. The longs got wrecked, and the shorts piling into the short as it breaks down are now wrecked as well, because anyone shorting down into 61, they got squeezed pretty quickly up to almost 67. So anyone shorting that on leverage has probably been taken out. And that's where it goes now to a phase where BTC just is pretty directionless, doesn't have much of a clear signal on where it's moving next. And then when you go back to the weekly, right, so on the positive side,